Good morning. Welcome to What's at Stake, a conversation on current events and sometimes controversial issues, and the topics that are at the core of justice, doing right, and being right in the community and the world. I'm Reverend Graylan Hagler, your co-host every second Wednesday of the month, and our executive producer is Verna Avery Brown. We've experienced much in terms of press recently, the issues around how stories are told. We have seen all kinds of manipulation of social media. We've seen things misquoted, misstated, deliberately distorted and contorted, that people do not know what to think or what to believe, and therefore people migrate to the source or sources that affirms their bias. And when you talk about the news and writing and journalism, it is often a matter of who tells the story, the kinds of nuances and subtleties that are constructed into the story that offers insight or racial, class, and gender bias. What parades as journalism today is often ruled by numbers, ratings, the rantings of personalities, and of course, always the bottom line. That's why I'm so glad that there is an outlet like WPFW-FM that continues to bring forth the kinds of discussions and conversations that are not necessarily focused on the bottom line or the rantings of personalities, but in terms of getting information out. Today, we are going to be speaking with Sam P.K. Collins. Sam Collins is a grassroots journalist, an educator with interdisciplinary experience as a writer, editor, producer, researcher, and filmmaker. He's had stints at NBC Universal, National Public Radio, American Urban Radio Networks, and Think Progress. The majority of Brother Collins' journalism experience has been with the Black press, specifically the Washington Informer. Along the way, Brother Collins has worked in the African-centered and homeschool communities, guiding young people through the writing process and exposing them to various forms of the written word. Mr. Collins has recently published a book, Babylon Be Still. Babylon Be Still compiles previously written works and chronicles Mr. Collins' social and political development. His journey starts here in Washington, D.C., at Truesdale Elementary School, high school at Banneker, and then on to George Washington University. I want to just take this time and welcome Brother Sam P.K. Collins, and welcome to What's at Stake on WPFW. And why don't you start out by telling us a little of what formed you to go down this road of journalism?
Give thanks. I'm very appreciative for the invitation, and peace and blessings to all of you who are listening. As far as my journalism journey, it started as I've always been a writer and a speaker. That was a gift I was gifted with. Even with a stutter that I had in elementary school, I just always felt the need to express myself on issues and to speak in class. But middle school at Paul Junior High, Independent Public Charter School, as it was called back in that day, I got into journalism because my father, he saw something in me, and he encouraged me to pursue journalism. And I did that throughout middle school. We had the Paul Post. And when I went to Banneker, there was no school newspaper. I instead chose to write for Young DC, which was a publication for high school students across the whole DC metropolitan area. And I continued to, at that point, I had a love relationship with mathematics and writing and the other disciplines, but I became more enamored with writing and history as I got older in high school. So in college, when I got to GW on a full ride, and I got immersed in the Black community, mind you, I had my Black consciousness somewhat living in DC, which was Chocolate City at the point. I became immersed in that community, and when I saw that they had a newsletter called the Black Ace, I was further inspired to go onto that staff and mold that newsletter into a magazine, which later became the Ace magazine. And that journey took me through GW, becoming a leader within the Black community, so to speak. And then from there, I just continued pursuing journalism with various internships and whatnot.
Good. How did just growing up in DC inform your perspective uniquely?
Definitely. DC, you take for granted that it was a chocolate city. And mind you, I'm a first generation Washingtonian. My parents, they immigrated from Liberia in the 1980s. So I'm the first born American child. My older brother came to the States in the early 2000s. So my younger brother and I, we often had to navigate district culture and Liberian culture at the same time. You know, there was a joke one of my aunties would say, well, when they're at home, they're in Cape Palmas, you know, in reference to my father's hometown, you know, because in the house, you're eating certain foods, you're listening to Liberian English, there's certain things, but as soon as you step off the porch and you go to school, you're in the neighborhood, and you're immersed in district culture, Black district culture, go-go, certain vernacular, certain things that district folks do. So most of my childhood was spent really reconciling those differences and finding similarities in those differences, especially having a last name like Collins and people figuring out that my parents immigrated here and they're asking, well, how'd you get the last name Collins? And then that's a whole conversation about the American Colonization Society and the movement of free Blacks back to the continent to start Liberia. But going back to DC, coming up as a youngster, you know, hopping off the porch once again, going to a go-go here and there, going to parties, getting immersed in the culture, just being around young people like me. And DC, you know, I mean, you can call it a beautiful place now, I guess, you know, new buildings and such, but back then DC had heart. You know, we had communities. You know, I knew people who lived around the corner from me. As a matter of fact, I saw one of them not too long ago. You know, she used to watch my younger brother and I walk to Truesdale from her porch every morning. My mother, when she took the bus, she had a community at the bus stop who she was with, you know, other Black women, you know, who she would speak with. On our block, it's gotten further and further gentrified. We're the last of the Mohicans, so to speak, on my block, my parents, you know, so, you know, with the brothers who lived across the street from us, they're gone. The sister who lived 2 or 3 doors down, she's gone, as well as the other brother and his family, he's gone. We're still there, but the block has gotten more diverse, so to speak. And you think about what caused this diversity, you know, nothing but raising property values and gentrification, as they call it. But DC was beautiful back then. It had its problems, mind you. You know, I think the only thing that I dealt with was just the ethnic conflicts, you know. So, all right, you were born here for generations, and I had parents who have African accents, so to speak. So I spent time reconciling those differences. But, you know, to be honest with you, I think that's an easier battle than what we have right now, when you just have people, you know, class and race. When you talk about that, at least they don't have any idea of what DC culture is.
Let me ask another question, because you just piqued my interest. Where did your folks, when they migrated to Liberia? From where?
So in speaking with my great aunt, I had a relative on my father's side who migrated back to Liberia from New Jersey. Okay. But to my knowledge, most of my family is of indigenous Liberian descent. So we have folks from the Bassa tribe and folks from the Gribbo tribe. Gribbo tribes, they're usually located in what's called Maryland County, Liberia. So that's off the eastern, I think it's in the southwestern part of Liberia. And then you have the Bassa people, they have their own county. But my mother's family is from West Point. West Point is a neighborhood that's outside of Monrovia or near Monrovia, Liberia. But for the most part, most of my family are indigenous to Liberia, except for one person who might have migrated back.
Right, because, you know, part of that history is that there were several movements or push to push people back into the African continent.
Yes, sir.
One was entirely racist.
Yes, sir.
Which was to get freed blacks out of the midst of the country because black folks were still enslaved, and freed blacks might inspire enslaved blacks to uprise. So there was the initiative then. Then Lincoln, of course, had an initiative. And then, of course, Black nationalism had an initiative as well that was independent of those folks in Garvey. And Garveyite movement was a part of that initiative. Alexander Crummell was a part of that initiative. So just wanted to sort of lay a little bit of that history out, hopefully get somebody curious about it, because you do have folks that in a sense got roots on both sides of the Atlantic, just like you do, right?
Yes,
and so that's a powerful thing to think of and to wrap your head around in terms of the political social movement. So I want to get at that because that's an important issue. How does that inform? Because you wrote this book. Babylon Be Still. What prompted you to write the book, and out of that history that I'm just talking about right now, what of that history informed you to write that book, that gave you the passion to write that book? Because you don't write books unless you get some passion about something. Exactly.
Before I go on to that answer, to your point about Garvey, I have to point out, and if you read Race First by Dr. Tony Martin, you will see that Garvey, before external forces nullified that plan, he had a vision of going to Liberia. He wanted to take the Black Star Line to Liberia and create a place there, speaking about Black nationalist aspirations of repatriation. And that place was going to be in Cape Palmas. He had acres set aside initially to go to Cape Palmas and to bring people there, and that's part of the history that as I grew deeper in my consciousness, I found out, and everything really came full circle for me. In terms of what inspired me to write the book, it was an awakening of class consciousness and ethnic consciousness, and all of that mixed in with my pursuit as a journalist who was deeply interested in what was happening to people of African descent here in DC. When I got to GW, Black people only constituted 6% of the population. District residents might have been only 2%. Most of them came through the scholarship. We got full rides. But as was told to me by a GW executive, I'm not going to say any names, the vision was to bring these DC people, DC students into GW and immerse them in the culture, and hopefully at some point have them go out into the world, into whatever position they would like, Fortune 500 companies, whatever the case is. When I went to GW, I saw that, first of all, DC wasn't represented there. And second of all, most of the students who went to GW matriculated through private schools and boarding schools. And when they go to DC, they don't have any understanding of what DC really is. They hear about the White House, they hear about the Washington Monument, but they don't know about the indigenous Black DC culture. And that was something that I spent most of my time fighting, because they called us locals. They lampooned us. They talked about our hybrid DC, North Carolina accents. They talked about the way that we wore New Balances, and they really did not take seriously go-go music. Not all of them, but it was consistent enough hearing people calling go-go music pots and pan music, not understanding call and response, not understanding how go-go is a part of our culture. And I spent most of my time fighting against that, mind you, not physically, but just trying to educate people about that. And that really influenced my journalism. Most of the time when I was at NBC Universal or at other internships, just trying to get a sense of how to write about, the Black experience in DC and how to put that on center stage. But even then, I found hurdles in doing that, because people often didn't want me to report on that. They wanted me to expand my horizon, so to speak. They couldn't quite understand why I was doing that. So throughout undergrad and grad school, I had to dig deep inside myself and make that connection back to Africa to see how we are all united, and step outside of myself and step outside of what I call the prison walls of the United States to gain a deeper consciousness that would inspire me and embolden me to become a better journalist and more committed and more fearless and talking about the truth of our people. And all of this happened at GW, you know, where I thought I made it, where I thought that because I had this scholarship, those were going to open for me, but they didn't, so to speak.
If you're just joining in with our discussion, you're listening to What's at Stake on WPFW-FM 89.3. And I'm Reverend Graylan Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month. And we are speaking with Sam P.K. Collins, journalist and the recent author of the book, Babylon, Be Still. And we're talking about his experiences as he moves and continues to move in a journalistic career, and the types of insight, the types of things that really motivated him to see the world in the way that he sees the world. And I want to get back to that discussion because DC was a major influence in terms of how you see the world and how you relate to the world. And I'm going to lace it together, and your Liberian roots, as well as your US roots. That's a very unique thing that comes. And see, one of the things that people always want to act as if somehow what they're doing is objective, right? And nothing is ever objective. When you talk about journalism or writing in this country, it's never objective. It always comes out of a subjective reality. The kinds of political influences, the kind of cultural influences, the presuppositions that you have when you approach things. And that's the same thing in theology. That's what I keep talking to folks about in theology, is that you got to own up to the fact that it all comes out of a preconceived bias. And so, part of basically being able to put things together and to be really honest in who we are, we got to admit that straight up. And I think that that's a part of what you admit in this book straight up, is that I'm writing from and seeing from this Pan-African experience. I'm seeing through these lenses that has informed my life. Why don't you comment on that a little bit?
Definitely. I call DC the epicenter of the Babylon system. And as a man who has taken on a certain liberty within the Rastafari movement, whatever you want to call it, Babylon is indicative and symbolic of confusion that people of African descent have been in the midst in. And we talk about different institutions that support the Babylon system, government, universities, churches, newspaper outlets. And when I talk about Babylon Be Still, that is my journey as a journalist to lay to rest any confusion that I might have had about why I am here, and to become more confident in reporting about journalism, in reporting about what matters to me. When I went through journalism school, they did talk about objectivity, but as I got through the industry, I learned time and time again that objectivity is for the most part non-existent, because at the very same time you have editors. You have to bring what you're talking about through people who might not have the same experiences as you. I've had these experiences at various outlets that I've been at. I remember feeling, deep, hurtful feelings in my gut, shaking in my boots, talking about things that I wanted to talk about, and just seeing the looks on colleagues' faces, looks of disinterest, looks of animosity at what I was talking about. And for the most part, a lack of understanding that I thought they would have, that I thought they would appreciate. At one point, I had a colleague, I'm not going to say his name once again, I'll protect him, because he should be ashamed of himself. He tried to discourage me against bringing up Harriet Tubman. When I was an intern at NPR, he told me there could only be but so much Black programming during the year. I need to step outside of the Black bubble and report on other things, expand my horizons. And at this time, I was 20, 21, 22. I'm thinking to myself, well, I'm Black, I'm African. Why can't I talk about Harriet Tubman? This is DC. Harriet Tubman, she has historical landmarks all across the Eastern Seaboard and whatever else, not too far from here. So why can't I talk about her? And that experience in particular really gave me, it hardened me a bit, because I learned more and more that there are people who are in positions of power, who want to maintain their power, who want to make sure their narrative is told. And when it comes to other narratives, if they haven't lived in it themselves or they don't understand it, they are not able to empathize with what you are, with what it is that you are going through, or with whatever it is that people who you talk about are going through. It wasn't until I got to the Black press that I felt really appreciated for the journalism that I brought. Because first of all, the Black press is much smaller. There's a lot more opportunity for you to get your hands dirty. And there's a Black consciousness there that is just so powerful, because in the Black press, we understand what it is. We come out of the tradition of John B. Rushworm, Frederick Douglass, and others, right? So we're coming there with the sense that we got to represent Black people to the fullest extent, and we got to contextualize their experiences. It's no longer about reporting crime. It's about explaining the manifestations of what's happening in our society.
I want you to comment a little bit on the decline in the Black press. Because at one point, because of segregation and because you had white media that had zero interest in even covering anything on the periphery, in the Black community, you had a more robust Black press. And since then, it has obviously gone through a decline. Can you comment on that?
Definitely. So as you said, at one point during segregation, Black reporters often were relegated to reporting on their own stories. White-owned newspapers, once again, painted us as savages. They painted us as, sex crazed, whatever you want to call us. And they would often report things from a slant where everything that was happening to us was our fault, so to speak, where we weren't humanized, where we were static characters in our own stories. Whereas in the Black press, and if you look at the National Newspaper Publishers Association, its beginning came out of a saying, and I'm going to butcher it. Basically, the saying was, let us plead our own cause, which meant that with everything that we are going through, with the potential that we have yet to meet on this side, we need institutions like newspapers that'll become conduits of information, and that'll become platforms where we can organize around issues that are important to us. So, and you have to understand that for the longest time on this side of the world, Black people and the media had a very, very funny relationship. Not even funny, but it just got to the point where Black people do not trust media, especially white-owned media outlets. And the Black press were institutions that were heralded in Black communities, where to the point you gave, churches, individuals, elders, whoever, kept the Black press going with donations and contributions and such, because the Black press was responsible for giving a platform to different community members and highlighting issues and documenting history as was going on in the Black community, humanizing Black people and doing things that the white press couldn't. But since integration, and I say this with no disdain towards colleagues who want to go to the Post, who want to go to the Times and whatever else, there has been sort of an exodus to other news outlets, where they think the grass is greener. But even there, I've, heard of people in the industry having to fight for what's theirs, having to fight for their place to tell the Black story. And, I'm just saying, all in all, that it has been a blessing to be in the Black press, to be immersed in that history, to be in close contact with people who have made history and who are continuing to make history, because no matter how lucrative or how well resourced, quote unquote, the other newspapers are, they don't have that proximity that Black newspapers have.
Right. And a big part of it has to do with the economics. The economics shifted. And so when you look at sort of like the history of the Black press, it was basically gentrification took it over. Yes, let me put it that way, right? Because we would not have known about a civil rights movement if it wasn't for the Black press. You would not have known about the funeral for Emmett Till if it wasn't for the Black press. The white press was not interested in covering those types of things. And so in a sense, at one point, the Black community was plugged in because you had robust periodicals that was reporting on what was going on, to the tiniest little press conference down in Sheep Dip, Alabama, that was being held by Black folks. And of course, with the decline in those media, the mediums, it has also, in a sense, created a kind of anemia in our abilities to be able to communicate.
And, in addition to that, I think with the proliferation of social media, and I experienced this as a person on the younger side of the industry, it's often a bit harder to bring up younger people inside the industry. And I think it's a problem that goes well beyond journalism. I've listened to university professors express their concerns, as well as K through 12 teachers. The written word is not really as much of a priority as it has been in the past. So when you're talking about new mediums of communication like videos, TikTok, social media posts with 140 characters or so, really getting into the nuts and bolts of current movements and really painting a picture of what people are going through is taking on a new meaning. And right now, as other newspapers with bigger budgets are on the cusp of that, and they're figuring out how to balance that, we at the Black press, we're not necessarily behind, but we're having our own discussions about how to make those two worlds meet. And I'm proud to say that at the Washington Informer, we're doing quite a beautiful job of doing that. But at the very same time, we do want to keep the written word alive, so.
And that's important, because when demagogues come to power, they don't burn social media and they don't burn cassette tapes or 8-tracks, the things of the past. They burn books.
Exactly.
Right? They burn the written word on paper, right? And the reason being is because those things have a tendency to be around almost forever. It's like right now I'm reading W.E.B. Du Bois's book, written in 1908, one of the first studies, entitled The Negro Church, one of the first studies that actually looked at the Black church in America, right? And I mean, it's filled with his own bias, but it's an important piece. But that book is still around. That book is still around, that you can look at, the launching pad for all of the research that has gone in on the Black church that subsequently follows W.E.B. Du Bois. So it still is an authoritative text. We're going to take a little break. We got a announcement, a PSA that we're going to have put on at this time. And when we return, I'm going to invite you to join in with us on our discussion. You can dial in at 202-588-0893. Let me repeat that, 202-588-0893. Join in the discussions. We will be back with Brother Sam Collins in just a little.
Water is life. It's a new year to care. Care Beyond Health and Freedom Events, Washington, D.C. area, January 15th, 2022, 11 a.m. at the Andinkra Cultural Arts Center, 3808 34th Street, Mount Rainier, Maryland. Your host, Faye Davis, Barbara Collier, Ali Collier, Annette Holmes, Justin Hindall, Ayana Collier. Saturday, January 15th, see and experience breakthrough health and water products. Financial freedom made easy. Personal development training. Special guest speakers, Nate Jackson, EDA Care Beyond, Coach David Smile, Global Expansion Leader. Gifts, drawings, and prizes. All attendees receive 5,000 CareBig tokens. Refreshments by Conscience Caterers. To reserve your seat for free, call or text Barbara at 202-997-8042. That's 202-997-8042. Water is life.
Hello, my name is Dr. Reed Tuckson. I am a former Commissioner of Public Health for our city and a member of the Black Coalition Against COVID. Here to tell you that if our community is to overcome this COVID pandemic, we have to support each other in creating a culture that prizes fighting for our own lives and protecting the lives of others. This is our community, and we have learned that no people but a people can save a people. We're only in the middle of this fight, and it's our community that is bearing the brunt of this. So follow the advice. Wear a mask every time you go out. Don't forget to social distance. Do the right thing every time. This ain't over. WPFW, your station for jazz and justice, serving the collective need and imagination of the community.
Welcome back. You are invited to join in the discussion with us at 202 202-588-0893, 202-588-0893. You're listening to What's at Stake on WPFW-FM 89.3. I'm the Reverend Graylan Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month, and we've been talking with Mr. Sam P.K. Collins, who's a journalist and an author, and we've been talking about his insight and his book, also Babylon Be Still. And so we're going to rejoin that discussion again. And I just want to lift up a few things. What do you see, Brother Collins, as the problem today in what passes itself off as journalism in the United States? What are some of the problems? And I want to engage with you in that because I see some problems as well.
Very good question. I think journalism has become more concerned with celebrity than facts in this day and age, and everybody has. So I'll say it like this. Living in DC for so long and seeing different parts of DC, and as I look back and I wrote the book, I realized why I didn't feel comfortable at GW. I had a great time at GW, but GW, as has been the case for the media space in DC, is too celebrity driven. You have people who are very, very enamored with celebrities and politicians, who want photo ops, who want the chance to say that they know them, but they don't hold them accountable. These journalists, I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, but I think that we as an industry, we have to do a better job of holding these people accountable and looking at them as humans who make mistakes or who need to be taken to task for what they are doing and what they are not doing. And oftentimes that is not the case because, outside of being a journalist, you might have gone to dinner with them, you might know their children, you might know them personally on a personal level. And as I get older as a millennial, a lot of my friends and colleagues from school are taking on positions as prosecutors. They're in different sectors of the industry. And I think about other journalists who have friends like that, who they might interview, and it calls the question of how do you hold these people accountable if you are so concerned about being their friend and about them liking you and you maintaining that relationship? And it also calls the question of what is your true purpose in being a journalist? And right now in the age of social media, I just see a lot of people being too concerned with maintaining good relationships and not telling the truth.
Right. Good point. And let me point this out because one of the things, if you look at what passes itself off as journalism in the U.S., it is as if the U.S. is the only place that exists.
Exactly.
You don't see any place else in the world where stories are presented, except when there's a flood or a hurricane or a cyclone and there's mass casualties or war. But other than that, you don't know anything about a whole world out there. That's one issue I see in a nutshell. And so in a sense, most Americans are ignorant that there is a world out there, right? They think people in Africa still live in huts. For example, right? You'll never hear a story that really explores, I'll give you, because I've been very involved in this issue, the issue of Palestine. You'll never hear a journalist approach the issue of the cultural and racial genocide that is going on against the Palestinians in that place called Israel. They will never touch it, right? Because there's a bias in the press. There's a whole lot of bias towards Black people in the United States of America. The stereotyping, in a sense, of Black and Latinx folks. All those types of things take place. We got a caller on the line. I want to go to that caller. Good morning. Welcome to WPFW. What's at Stake? How are you?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good morning, and thank you for allowing me to be a part of your broadcast this morning. I want to thank the young brother for speaking about the gentrification in DC and everything that's going on in the district. However, I want to share a little bit about my son's story because I've been looking for a journalist who would be willing to share my son's story. My son is currently incarcerated at the Frederick, Maryland Detention Center, and has been since 2020. My son has developed COVID while incarcerated. My son was accused of raping a white woman who was in the process of using drugs. My son walked up on this action and helped the lady. When the police came, they arrested my son. The lady even told the police it wasn't my son who did that to her, but they still locked my son up. And now they're getting ready to send him to 30 years in prison. So I'm trying to find someone who will help me get my son's story out there. I hired a lawyer to represent my son. And while we were in court, the lawyer actually came out and said, when you guys finish with this case, we're going to call you lynch them because we know y'all going to lynch him. So we had to fire the lawyer and get another lawyer. So we're trying to find someone who can help me get my son's story out there. Because even though the victim said my son did not commit this crime against her, the state is still trying to sentence my son to prison for 30 years.
What we'll do is we'll get your name and number offline, and I'll give it to Brother Collins if that's okay. Michael's our engineer in the studio. Can you get her number and name, Michael, and then we can pass that on to Brother Collins. So thank you so much. He's going to do that to you. He's going to take your name and number now. Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you for calling in. You have a comment you want to make on that, Sam, or you want to just? We got some other callers on. You want to hear some other callers?
Please, when I get the information, I'll definitely follow up.
All right.
Yeah.
And we got another caller on the line. Why don't you come on and just share your comment or insight? Good morning.
My name is Mr. Smith. I was so elated to hear you guys talk about reading and books and maintaining our culture. I was been one to try to tell some folk in the media, when you talk to some of our young people, please ask them, how many books are you reading? Encourage them to read things, to keep up with temporary events, and to keep all of your books. If we got a set of books, I have a tutorial practice. When I go to the Algebra 1, I just grab the book. But now they're trying to go with a bookless society, and it won't work. If we keep those books and encourage our young people to read as much as they possibly can, because that's going to be the thing when they get that foundational skills, math, reading and writing and science and computers. These are going to be the things that catapult them forward. And when we listen to sophisticated programs like you and Brother Collins, and these kids get into a love of words. I just read a piece about Stacey Abrams and how she fell in love with words and started looking up the various words she didn't know. But I'm saying the whole idea of keep pushing those people, our people, to read, write, and save their books and collect books.
Amen.
And I'm
Thank
so
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You want to comment on that, Brother Collins?
Yes, sir. And I want to thank the Baba for that call. As an educator, I often do my best to expose young people to writing from different parts of history. And something I found is that when young people understand the history behind those writings, they become even closer with it. Writing is writing like primary documents and, where people are, speeches and books, biographies. They're often good opportunities to speak about what was happening during that time. One text that comes to mind for me is MLK's mountaintop speech. I've spent many years reading that speech with young people, and it's a good chance to speak about literary devices, speak about what was happening with King consciously at that time, speak about what was happening around the world during that time. And, another speech of King's that I like is, well, not a speech, it's rather the Birmingham letter. I remember teaching that when it might have been the day after a fight happened at a school I was working at. And I used that speech as a as a way to that students, as an example of how students can express their grievances, because King did a wonderful job. And I've also used portions of Ida B. Wells's writings, Malcolm X's, Sojourner Truth's. We're going to go into Selassie at some point. We've done Winnie Mandela, just a whole gamut, you know. And I learned that when kids know their history and they know what was happening during that time as background, they become even more interested in what it is that they're reading.
Yes, if you're just joining with us, you're listening to What's at Stake on WPFW-FM 89.3. I'm the Reverend Graylan Hagler, your host every second Wednesday of the month, and we are speaking with Brother Sam Collins, who is an author. His book is Babylon, Be Still, and he's also a journalist. And we have another caller on the line. I'm gonna go to that caller because we do want to hear from you. Good morning. Join the discussion.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. We got to keep it real about the legacy, the Black legacy, old Black legacy media. They speak with forked tongues. The old Black media is owned or controlled by the Democrat Party. If you look at the Washington Informer, when Kamala Harris was running. They knew her background, but they constantly pushed this woman who has a 20-year record of oppressing Black people. So you can't say that you're for Black people when you're pushing a candidate like Kamala Harris, like Joe Biden. You guys push them on Black people. Black people just didn't know better. So you can't say that the old media is for Black people, because most of it, 90% of it, is owned by white or Hispanic corporations. Now, as far as the young lady whose son is incarcerated, the old media is not going to help her. She needs to call a brother like Phil Scott from the Advise Show, or Africa Diaspora News on YouTube, or Tariq Nasheed.
Or Sam Collins.
Well, I'm sure he's a good brother, but I haven't heard nothing about that brother. I don't know. And I listen to Washington. I watch the Washington Informer. I comment on the Twitter all the time.
That's the brother you're talking to right now. He's on the air with us. That's Sam Collins.
Yeah. Let's see what he do about that. Now,
right.
So let's see if this brother can be honest about how the old dead Black media, Essence, Ebony, all those are white owned. They push the Democrat lines.
But let's be fair. The past history, the segregated history, they were not white owned. Right, they were not.
How long ago was that? Let's talk about the past 10 years.
Well, the past 10 years maybe, but I'm talking about, but that's a part of the gentrification of journalism, of Black media that has taken place, just like the gentrification of your neighborhoods. Right. It was just like folks didn't know that there was a whole lot of money in the numbers operation, because it was obviously within the Black community. And folks realized that there was money in the numbers operation, and eventually the state took it over. Right. I mean, so you're dealing with all of these kinds of economic issues that are upon us. And yes, you're possibly right that we are harnessed by the Democratic Party in terms of journalism right now. But you got to ask this question. We have ceased to have a political imagination other than a dual party system, right? We don't think beyond a dual party system because, in a sense, all of us have been conditioned in our imagination to either plug into two parties, one party or the other, or sit it out. Well, isn't there another alternative? Isn't there something that's larger that's before us? And I think that's what Brother Collins is trying to get at in terms of his writing, in terms of his Pan-African experience.
If I may.
No. Hold on. The new Black media, Tariq Nasheed, Professor Black Truth, the Black Authority, Yvette Carnell, y'all haven't talked none about them on the old media.
Okay, thank you very much.
One second. Brother, I don't know your name, but I would highly encourage you to research me. Go on Google, type in Sam P.K. Collins, Washington Informer. I have written about Yvette Carnell. Tariq Nasheed, not as much. In terms of my political affiliation, I'm a Pan-African nationalist. I am not beholden to the Republican or Democratic Party. I have not voted for a Democrat ever since I came out of grad school. So those are my credentials. In terms of the media in general and its love affair with the Democratic Party, I, in some degree, agree with that. That's part of the reason why I, as a journalist, I will say this until the day that I pass on into the other realm. I have more latitude to work within the Black press than any other place, because they understand that even though they might give the Democratic Party a platform, that there are spaces for voices like mine that speak outside of the Democratic Party. So once again,
and Brother Collins, let me throw this thing out, because what sometimes folks confuse is, and I'm gonna focus on your term, Babylon be still, right?
yes,
What folks don't realize is that we exist within a context which you describe as Babylon, which is corrupt, distorted. It conditions people to either follow along or so-called drop out, right? There's generally, there's generally no other alternative that the system sets up. It's like everybody was surprised that Obama would not advocate for Black folks. Well, his skin was Black, but he was in a position and in a context that was built on white supremacy.
exactly.
Right. So what are you going to do in that? Right. You done took the helm. You done took the helm of a white supremacist context. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that at all?
I definitely agree, and we got to have more imagination. We got to be, that's why, in terms of Babylon be still, the reason why, part of my experience, and I say this time and time again, I've gotten a lot of education out when I left college. In college, I learned about how to write as a journalist, how to form stories and things like that. And I grew stronger at the Informer, but it was being immersed in Pan-Africanism that exposed me to the possibilities beyond what the Democratic or Republican Party can do. And that is what helped me become more of a responsible journalist. So I'm not out here writing stories that take for granted that politicians have done things in the past or have not been beholden to the Black electorate. I'm not like that. I don't feel the need to prove myself to anybody on that. All I will say is just, before you come on the air, by all means, please, take a look at the articles, take a look at the book, and get an understanding of how I came into consciousness and how that affects the tenor of what I write.
Babylon Be Still is the book. And I just want to say before I forget, the sister who called in, she left her number in the chat. If you can get that out of the chat, Brother Collins. There's another caller. I want to ask that caller to join us in the discussion this morning. Good morning. Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, hi. I just want to make a real serious comment about how I grew up in downtown Washington, D.C., around Front Roy, Walter Washington, and all them. How, as teenagers, we were instrumental in getting the mayors elected, getting petitions done and getting the mayors elected. Howard University radio station in the 70s by a man named Bill Street and a man named Bernard Gray, and all these people, and a lady named Kathy Hughes, all these people as teenagers when we were kids, and getting the council also re-elected, not, appointed anymore, the mayor specifically by the president. One day when in the 60s, we were little kids, we were walking, I grew up around Logan Circle, around the corner from Clooney's house. The lady named Dr. Height would let us come in and hang out with little kids and everything, And we seen her on the TV with Martin Luther King and all these people. And we wanted to be like her growing up as children. That's how come I started getting politically active in my community. And all of a sudden, I started noticing after the 68 riots, how my community was just went to hell, destroyed. All the Black people seen with money and everything. We had banks and all that. One time when I was a kid in the 60s, I seen Nat King Cole ride through my neighborhood. Yeah, and a white Rolls Royce. James Brown, all of these people. And my culture, my whole community just went to hell. And I think specifically the Democrats have sold us out. One day I was at my son's house back a few months ago in the summer or so, early fall. And I was looking at C-SPAN. And what's her name? Stacey Abrams came on talking about her book, Sleepless, whatever it was. I forgot now. But this man came on named Robert Woodson. Robert Woodson, I don't know if you know him. He got this book out. He said the Democratic Party, the reason why they left in the 90s because all the federal money that was passed for us. The Democratic Party squandered something trillions out of us. And I look around, I see all these immigrants and foreigners and everything coming here to talk to black people like crap. And I had to get an African lady one time straighten out talking about you black Americans think you all this. You damn right.
Thank you so much. And I think that, yeah, they talk to us like crap and the Republicans talk to us like crap, right? So we're, so the reality is that's what exists. What I want to say also, Brother Collins, because we're running out of time, but I want to say this, is that one thing that I've been a stickler on in my preaching and teaching is words that we accept without even dissecting those words. Like I very often preach, a black person cannot be a conservative. Because the root of conservative means you're trying to conserve something. And if I can use your word, your analogy, in Babylon, what are you trying to conserve? Are you conserving enslavement? Are you conserving white supremacy? Are you conserving lynchings? Are you conserving economic disadvantage? So a black person, if you understand the history, cannot be a conservative because everything that you had to do to survive, you had to kick some walls down and kick some doors open. That's not a conservative, right? But we buy into that because it becomes our safety blanket within this white world. And so we buy into it and say, oh, the church is conservative. Well, not really, not the black church, right? The black church has had to fight to survive. We fall into that trap every single time. And I give thanks to God right now because Trump exposed the hypocrisy in the theology. As the white evangelical churches rallied around somebody who was so immoral and so corrupt, and they didn't have any type of crisis, theological crisis, in rallying around them. It exposes the hypocrisy of the theology. But, and it says, you need to come out from under that, that kind of theology and get free again, get free in terms of the theology that we understand that comes, just like you write, that comes out of our experience.
Exactly.
And so I'm really thankful for your book. There was some issues I would take some what's the word? I would question some of the things, not the foundation of the book and not any of your statements and not your religiosity and your spirituality. I wouldn't question that. I'm a historian. I question some of the history or the connection of the history, and it's just a few theological points. And we can talk about that offline because that's not even serious. And that's not even the fullness and the power of your book. And yes, I bought it and I read it. So I think you can hear the way I'm asking some of the questions. And for that opportunity. And I thank you so much for writing this book. Be very quick. We got to sign off. Give us just a statement, closing statement as we prepare to sign off.
Babylon Be Still covers a decade of my metamorphosis as a Pan-African nationalist and as a grassroots journalist and educator. I really encourage you to buy it, if for no other reason than to pretty much understand why it is right now we need to be self-determined now more than ever. We need our own institutions. We need our own voice now more than ever. And let this book show you the way. Amen. You've been listening to Brother Sam P.K. Collins, who has been our guest, author of the book, Babylon Be Still. And I want to thank you, the audience, for joining me this morning. I look forward to being with you again on the second Wednesday of the month. I would like to thank our engineer, Michael Nasala. I want to thank our executive producer, Verna Avery Brown, for all of her great work and all of her concern for the community. And I want to thank you, the entire WPFW community. I can't wait to be with you again. I want you to be empowered, be uplifted, and be blessed, knowing that we have a lot to get done, and we will do it. Take care.